All right, guys. Our next bit of movie news we're going to talk about today is The Sandman. Yeah, this has been a movie that has been in production for so long, so many different stages of production. A few years back, I don't know if you guys remember this, but Joseph Gordon-Levitt was attached to this for a while. It was going to be like this next big kind of movie sensation kind of a thing, and that whole thing just completely fell apart. Now, if you're not familiar with The Sandman, it's a graphic novel. I guess you could even say a comic book series by Neil Gaiman, acclaimed writer Neil Gaiman, and comic book illustrator as well. He for DC Comics wrote the epic The Sandman. Now this is volume 2. This here, hold on. Let's jump over to here for a second. This is volume 2. Look at this thing, you guys. So this is omnibus. This is one of the omnibuses. This thing is massive. I'm currently reading volume 1, which is funny because, not necessarily funny. It's just the serendipity of it all. Volume 1 is just as thick as volume 2. It is massive. It is huge. And I started reading it a few years ago, and I just never continued on with it. So honestly, maybe like 2 weeks ago, I thought, let's pick it up. Let's pick up The Sandman. Let's really start sinking our teeth into the story and start getting into it. And then here we are like a week later, and Netflix announces that they've cast the show. So if you're not already familiar, The Sandman, which originally was supposed to be like a movie property franchise thing, it's now being developed by Netflix for a television series, which I think is a better way to go. I mean, as you can see, there is just so... And like I said, this is volume 2. This is volume 2 of the Sandman epic. There is just so much stuff to cover. I think bringing the Sandman to Netflix as a television series is the better move here. Like I said, it's like a Game of Thrones kind of thing. There's so much info. There's so much going on. So yeah, let's jump into this casting announcement real quick, shall we? Let's jump on down. We have some familiar faces, and we have some faces that we're not quite so familiar with. So here we are. Tom Sturridge. If you're not familiar with Tom Sturridge, don't slap yourself on the wrist, because I feel like that's a lot of us right now. Tom Sturridge is mostly an indie actor. I had to look up his IMDb profile. I myself am not all that familiar with his work, and that's because he's done a lot of indie type stuff. I think it's really interesting when you get a really I can't speak to his quality of acting, except that look at the types of projects that he's been in. And I'm not going to look up his IMDb profile right now. I'll let you guys do that on your own. But look at the kinds of films that he's been in. He's kind of taken not the Robert Pattinson approach, but Robert Pattinson went out and did Twilight, and then he came back, or he kind of receded a little bit and started doing tons and tons of indie films. Where Tom Sturridge is that's all he's kind of done are these indie films. Gwendolyn Christie. We were talking about Game of Thrones previously. There's a little bit of a Game of Thrones vibe here with Charles Dance as well coming into the show, but Gwendolyn Christie playing Lucifer, it's a casting choice I never would have thought of. I never would have thought to cast Gwendolyn Christie as Lucifer. And you guys, this just makes all the sense in the world to me. That it just seems perfect, right? Charles Dance is coming in as playing what's his name? Burgess. Roderick Burgess. And again, if you haven't read here, okay, here's the thing, you guys. If you're not already familiar with the story of the Sandman or the comic The Sandman or whatever, I will give you just a brief overview. The Sandman is a story in the DC Comics realm, and yes, it takes place in the same universe as Batman, Superman, and all the rest, right? So in this world, in this universe, there's this guy, Roderick Burgess, who wants to capture death and have power over death, like the Grim Reaper, essentially. He wants to capture death and kind of become the ruler of life and himself, and like continue on living forever in perpetuity. And instead of capturing death, he captures Death's brother, the Sandman, or Dream, right? And so now, after Dream has been in captivity for close to a century, not quite a century, but close to a century, the Sandman breaks out of captivity, and he comes to find that many of his relics, the things that he uses as the Sandman, have been dispersed around the world. They've gone missing, and so now he goes on this journey to get his stuff back. And again, if you're familiar with any amount of DC Comics, familiar faces will start popping up. Again, I'm not going to give too much away, but John Constantine, if you're familiar with John Constantine, he's a character that pops up, and plenty of other characters that you'll recognize. Anyway, so that's just a brief overview of the Sandman story, and there's so much more. My goodness, I barely even scratched the surface, right? But I think it's really interesting that we're going to get this cast, this particular, and again, there's many other names on here that I'm not familiar with. I will say, familiar with Boyd Holbrook, who, if you saw the Wolverine movie, Logan, he kind of played the bad guy in Logan. Anyway, I think this is really cool. I'm really looking forward to this. We don't know like when it's going to start shooting. Of course, we're not entirely sure when it's going to come out. Hopefully 2022, I think sounds like a pretty solid bet. Maybe in the first, maybe the second quarter of 2022, I would imagine, I would think. And if they do this, anything of like how the comic or the graphic novel plays out, you guys, I think this is going to be epic. I really do. I think the Sandman is going to be something completely epic. But the question is for you: what do you think of the casting of the Sandman? How do you think the story is going to play out? Where do you see them going with this? What's the longevity? Do you think? What do you think the crowd reception is going to be for the Sandman? Because it's largely an unheard of property unless you are in like the comic book sphere, graphic novel world. This is like I don't know, is this like the graphic novel version of Lord of the Rings, like in terms of epic size and scale? Maybe. I think it'll be really interesting to see this play out. But like I said, what do you guys think of it? Jump on down to the comment section below and let me know your thoughts. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you like this video, click like. If you really like this video, click subscribe. And if you really, really like this video, click share. Because that is exactly what the golden idol from Raiders of the Lost Ark would want you to do. Whoosh, whoosh.